I went to the pursuit of truth. So I just been trying to set up these Sky News bits about the Israel-Hamas war from different sides to try and bring together all these bits, because I think it's interesting from a human perspective to gather all this information to show, the thing is that I hope when listening to this, we reflect. I certainly do. When you hear about all these things and you hear the hard-heartedness of the politicians of the West, of Israel, of Hamas, and then you hear the heartfelt of the actual victims, whether it's the Israeli people, civilians that were targeted on the massacre of the worst one since 1948, with 1,300 dying. The stories of them from the actual people, that's where you hear the heart, where they're talking about, people being shot, people being beheaded, people being burned. This is not the action of normal human beings. This is not the action of religious people. This is not, this shouldn't be what we're doing to each other. And from the Hamas, from the Palestine side, hearing the heartfelt people who are in a siege without food and water, babies without food and water, hospitals struggling, 1 million people having to move from one side of Gaza to the other in, a few days before this big strike happens. People from Israel and from the West claiming there isn't any humanitarian crisis going on. I don't know, I've got the one where there's one person talking about the idea that war crimes may have been committed by Israel and by turning off the water, by moving these people and the things that are going on there, and that the West may be complicit in this. Rishi Sunak, MP Cleverly, Anthony Blinken, Joe Biden, to name but a few, who haven't, when they publicly talk, they talk about that Israel's right to defend and proportionality and this, that and the other, but they haven't, reinforced international law when it comes to them, that they should be able to say, like I can as a human being, that yes, we deplore what happened on last Saturday with the massacre of 1,300 Israelis, but we can't allow international law and the Geneva Convention not to be followed, in the sense of, how can, like one person, I don't know if I've got that one, where they talk about babies, not being able to get water or milk, children water and babies milk. That is not acceptable, and I fear that it's verging on, like genocidal type of way, by starving out the people by this, that and the other, and the way that it's being done. I know it's difficult because Hamas and Palestine, they're interchangeable in the sense that when they go in there, and I don't know how they're going to do it, when they go in there, how are they going to know who's who? Yeah, they've said, well, you've got to all move, but not all of them are going to be able to move. And I'm sure if Hamas is able to do these terrible things to Israelis, imagine what they're doing to the Palestinians as well. Just because they're fighting for Palestine doesn't mean that they're treating them any better. So they may not be able to move. So I don't know how this is just going to be very, very messy. And that's the unfortunate part of it. It's like I mentioned, like Vietnam, it's going to be very guerrilla warfare, and it's difficult to, I suspect a lot of the Hamas have tried to move to the other side so that they can become sleeper cells. So I don't think this is not really going to solve the problem. I think you can only solve the problem as a human being with talking to each other. But I know because of the history that, and that's probably why the hard-heartedness has come, that these, I've heard both of from Hamas and from Israel, even Palestine, talking about each other as not human, using those kind of phrases, that they're animals, or the human animals and things like that from all sides. And so they've got to that stage where they no longer see the truth, they no longer see the beauty of humanity and keeping it alive. That suffering and that vengeance is just overtaken And that's why we need international laws, because that stops us from doing the most heinous of things, like what happened on Saturday to Israelis. Like what's happening now is spiralling around the world, where we're getting Israeli children in the UK not going to school on Friday, not wearing their caps, not wearing their uniforms. A 6-year-old in America and his mother getting stabbed because they're from Palestine. Islamophobia and what's the Jewish one? I forgot this. These types of hate crimes in a week, whereas in the UK it's hate week, anti-hate week, I suppose I should say. This it's, and that's why I want to get these examples, because I want to show this is what humanity. There's some humans you're going to hear that they just, all they care about is power and greed and possession, and that's why I don't believe in these borders and fighting for bits of land that we can never, hope to obtain, because we will die. We should be finding a way to live with each other, and that's why the system and the way we've lived for so long doesn't work, and it isn't progressive for humanity, for the benefit of humanity. And then you see some people who, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Palestinian or whatever, or Israeli, they're talking about humanity. They can see the suffering from humanity's side. It doesn't matter which side of whether you're on the Palestinian or the Israeli border. Humans are humans. And there's suffering going on for both sides, Israelis and Palestinians. And I don't know, I just wish there was a better answer than killing each other. I just, the problem is, I would wish they could just talk out and say, yeah, let's all just agree to live harmoniously in this one bit of land and just work together and benefit. The whole world do that. But the problem is that's not what happens, because unfortunately, usually, the people in power don't really want those kinds of things, and the people who support them also don't really want those things. They don't mind this disruption. They don't mind certain things happening because it benefits them. I was going to say disablement, not disablement. The disruption, because it keeps, it just keeps people lower. Because if we were lived in a world where we all wanted to be the same, we could have done that, infrastructure-wise and all that kind of stuff. But we haven't. We've decided that some countries have to be higher than others, and it's kept that way, whereas it shouldn't be that way. Anyway, I waffled on more than I was going to. Let's hear some of these clips. I don't know how many I'll get through, but you can hear some of them and see, unfortunately, what humans are capable of and the suffering that we're putting each other through.
Shouting Allah Akbar.
Michael has family in Israel. He's had bad news about 2 of his relatives.
One of them, they found his body. The other one, we don't know what happened to him. He's disappeared. We don't know, we have no idea what happened to him.
Religious leaders say across Europe, Jewish communities feel threatened.
A friend of mine in Barcelona contacted me saying, Rabbi, don't go out in the streets of London, be careful. And I think there is a sense we have to be careful, we have to be vigilant.
But at a large pro-Palestine demonstration outside the Israeli embassy, people wanted their voices to be heard.
That's why I came here, I raised my voice, stop the war, stop the war. We want peace, we want to live together, we don't want to kill each other. That's enough, enough, enough.
This is not about anti-Semitism. Standing up for the issue of Palestine is asking for justice, respect for international law, and an end to occupation.
At its peak, 5,000 people joined the protest, setting off flares and fireworks. A group then made their way to Downing Street, where they set fire to an Israeli flag. In Liverpool, outside the Labour Party conference, there was an angry exchange.
Stop the murdering of innocent Israelis and Jews! Stop it! Why? Stupid woman!
The Home Secretary has said there'll be zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, and the Prime Minister spoke at a service at a synagogue in Finchley.
When the Jewish people are under attack in their homeland, Jewish people everywhere can feel less safe. We've already seen vile words on our streets and attempts to stir up community tensions. I say, not here. Not in Britain. Not in our country. Not in this century.
As Parliament was...
It's funny, there was a clip I had of him previous Pursuit of Truth where he was pertaining to that Britain isn't a racist country. So if it isn't a racist country, why when something happens all this racism coming out then?
in the colours of the Israeli flag. In communities around the country, there's pain, tension, and the fear of what will happen next. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Central London.
Let's bring in Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Hi, Jake. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Heard from the Foreign Secretary this hour saying that demonstrators, Palestinian demonstrators, should stay home. What would you say?
I would say that that's good advice. I mean, nobody is denying that the Palestinian supporters have a right to express their views and have a right to support the Palestinians as a reasonable cause. But I think we need to take stock of what has just happened these past few days. We have seen the acts of the most medieval barbarism meted out on Israeli men, women and children, all of whom are entirely innocent within Israel's internationally recognized boundaries and just going about their daily lives. These are acts of barbarism, the likes of which, unfortunately, are familiar to Jews from previous centuries, from the Holocaust and stretching further back all the way into medieval times. And the fact that people in Britain can react to those atrocities by going out onto the street and waving the Palestinian flag without any thought of the victims or of showing any solidarity with those innocent lives lost is really despicable.
I thought for the civilians in Gaza who are trapped there this morning with no food, no water, no electricity.
Listen, I spoke to a friend of mine in Gaza on the phone just yesterday. They're scared. There is a lot of support for Hamas in Gaza, don't get me wrong, but there is a significant number of ordinary Gazans who, as he put it, can't see the point in this, understatement of the century perhaps, but they just feel totally let down and betrayed by the surprise attack which has led to such retaliation all around them. It's a tragic situation, and Palestinian lives and Gazan lives are, of course, needless to say, equally as valuable as Israeli lives, but we need to recognize that this was an unprovoked act of mass carnage, barbarism, savagery, and terror. Proportionately, don't forget, Israel is a very small country. Its population is smaller than that of London. If you were to scale that up, proportionately, it would be equivalent to about 7,500 British deaths. That's the scale that we're talking about. It's proportionately bigger, more than double the size of 9/11. This is a national trauma. It's existential for Israel. And we must recognize that when mobs take to the streets of London, screaming Hamas slogans, flying Hamas flags, it causes a real sense of danger for Jews in Britain who this morning are living with heightened security around their schools. My nephew just yesterday was shouted at in the street because he was visibly Jewish. Jewish school children are being told to take off their kippot, to take off their blazers, identifying them as going to Jewish schools when they go to and from schools. There's a heightened police presence. These are very dark times indeed, reminiscent of previous centuries.
And what advice is the paper offering to the Jewish community at the moment?
Well, we are blessed with having a good community security group called the Community Security Trust and support from the Home Secretary who visited that group yesterday. I met her myself and she pledged that this would not be a repeat of 2021 when the Gaza conflict there spilled out onto the streets of Britain and we saw convoys of thugs driving through Jewish areas with megaphones swearing they would rape Jewish mothers and daughters. She swore that would not happen again. She called that a failure. Funding has been increased since then, and her advice was for Jews to call the police and local security at the first sign of trouble. Look, there's good advice for the Jewish community. Everybody understands the precautions that need to be taken, but it's outrageous that in Britain, democratic Britain, Jews need to live under this sort of everyday threat.
I mean, I get what he's saying in the sense that democratic Britain, Jews shouldn't be fearful of anything, and anyone shouldn't be. But obviously in democratic Britain, people should be able to protest, but obviously they should be protesting, within the law and for the right things. I mean, I guess technically you're allowed to protest about anything, but like what he says, it should be we should be thinking about human beings. Our protest should be about what's happening to both Israeli and in Gaza, to Palestinians and Israel. And I know there is obviously the problem of the occupation, and that's what messes this a little bit, and of the treatment of Palestine. But of course, equally what Hamas has done previous to the massacre on Saturday has also, these two just don't seem to want to work together. But I think the thing was wrong with Cleverly and this to say that people shouldn't be protesting. I mean, yeah, we shouldn't be burning Israeli flags. That's unacceptable. And it shouldn't. But the problem is, I suppose the problem is with protesting is it brings out of the woodwork what Rishi Sunak thinks doesn't exist in this country, which is those racists who, there may be lots of people who are Palestinian or pro-Palestinian or feel for the Palestinian people genuinely, who don't believe in violence, don't believe in war, who are pacifists, and want to protest about that part of it, and not diminishing what's happened to, not feeling for what's happened to the Israelis in this terrorist act. But the problem is there's those people who are just going to come along who just, they're filled full of the racism or hate, and they get mixed up within that, and that's the problem, isn't it? That's the problem with any protest. No protest can be perfectly peaceful because there's always going to be those people who just want to come there for a fight, or who, their heart's not really genuinely in it, in the sense that they don't really want peace. They want revengeance, or they want, the power, the greed, and all that kind of stuff that, that it is counterintuitive to this. So I get what he's saying. I don't know, is difficult, because if you're going to talk
Germany,
about,
France, Italy.
If you're going to talk about democracy, then you have to allow people to protest, because that is a right. But yeah, people should be protesting peacefully, as they did a few days ago in London. It was all, only 6 people arrested, and it was all peaceful. But I do get why they would feel, why does no one care about them? No one's protesting about, what's happened to them. But I suppose it's because we all have, and all the world leaders have acknowledged, and we all acknowledge that, yes, what was done on Saturday was a massacre and terrible, and there's no justification for that. But I guess the problem is when we're seeing what's happened to Gazan civilians, women and children, that's where we, and we feel our world leaders are not really saying, oh, this is wrong as well. That's why people come out on the streets. Why is there protests for this? Whenever there's something wrong, any injustice, that's where protests usually come about. So that's a sign of something. All right, here's the next one.
Hello, welcome back. There have been demonstrations and declarations of support from around the world for both Israel and the Palestinian civilians. Joining us now from Miami is Harley Lipman, who's part of the executive committee of the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee and the Middle East Partnership for Peace as well. Very good to talk to you today. What went through your mind when you saw the footage of the attacks inside Israel on Saturday? I mean, aside from the horror of what those images showed, do you fear now that we are further from peace than ever?
Yes and no. I mean, the first reaction is that this is the first time since the Holocaust that Jews in these numbers are being murdered just because they're Jews. And this is how Holocaust began. Auschwitz only began in 1942. The Germans did exactly what Hamas did. They went home to home looking for Jews, burned them alive if they didn't come out, raped them. And this is what Hamas is doing. So you can't but think back that this is somehow feeling like history repeating itself. As far as
Harley, just saying, when Hamas carried out these attacks, it will have known, obviously, that the horror, the rage that these images would provoke, and that it would lead to a much greater conflagration. Do you fear that that is now inevitable, that there will be a huge loss of life inside Gaza, which of course doesn't just mean Hamas, does it? It means Hamas and civilians.
Exactly, and that's exactly right. So Hamas has calculated that by holding these hostages, that they'll use it as a bargaining chip to prevent Israel from massive retaliation. But here's the thing. Yes, there'll be a huge loss of life, sadly, of many innocent Palestinians. But who's responsible for that? Hamas. They're hiding in underground bunkers right now. They don't care about their people. They're leaving them to the mercy of Israeli retaliation. You know, even suicide bombers don't come from the leadership of Hamas. Their kids go to European universities. So they are responsible. When you fire rockets from somebody's living room, you are responsible for a reaction to that, not to blame Israel for defending itself. It's a cynical ploy to, set the stage. They have a perfect strategy: murder Jews, then wait for retaliation, blame Israel. The press will turn against Israel, say excessive force. Israel is in an impossible situation, but what else are they to do?
I get what he's saying there, and like what else they've got to do, because I think I've already expressed that, it's a very difficult situation, because of where they are and all that. But my issue with a lot of the argument that comes from Israel and the West is that, yes, I get it that it's Hamas's fault. They're the ones who have done it, and they purposely brought people back to the area where they know this is going to happen. Maybe they, like they say, they want the images of civilians getting killed for their argument, hoping, like he says, the press and the world to go against it. But Israel have a responsibility as well. If they're the ones dropping bombs and shooting people, they have a response by international law, Geneva Convention and general humanity, to only want to or only kill those that are terrorists, those that are the ones that you want to get. You don't really want babies and children and women and elderly and civilians, non-combatants, to get killed. And I'm sure that that's not really what they want, but the problem is the way they're doing it is going to cause that. And that's, from Islamic point of view, I don't believe bombs are allowed, because with Islam, you have rules of law, like you have international law, like I'm sure it's in the Torah and in the Bible as well, in the sense that you can only kill those who you're fighting with, not civilians, and therefore a bomb can't distinguish between that. So I get this argument of Hamas are using schools or universities, but the problem is if there's civilians in there, it's like, I don't think if it was no, I would like to say I don't think, but I suspect the West have done the same in Iraq and Afghanistan. But if you are, wanting to only act revenge or on those people that did it, if you know there may be civilians in it, you can't then just blow everyone up. That isn't justifiable just because it's Hamas's fault for the situation. It isn't justifiable. So I don't get that argument that keeps coming out, but I get why they say it. Yes, Hamas are responsible, but also those involved in a war have duty to protect civilians and not cause their deaths. And just from a human point of view, just thinking about, it's not only the dropping the bombs, it's the food and electricity and water. That's hitting civilians probably more than Hamas, who probably have bunkers full of food and all sorts of generators and etc. The food and water is going to affect babies before it affects anyone else, and the elderly. So that's the issue where, I have on that. But I get where he's coming from. Like, it's a difficult situation Israel's in, but I don't know really what the solution is. That's the problem. There probably isn't any better solution, but that doesn't mean that that's acceptable to go against international law and kill innocent human beings.
In terms of the diplomatic avenues that are open, we understand that Qatar is involved in trying to broker conversations with Hamas about exchange of releasing the prisoners that were taken in exchange for perhaps some Palestinian prisoners who are held in Israeli jails. Do you fear? Do you have any hope from that? Does Qatar have the influence here?
They do. because they fund Hamas. So since they're responsible for keeping Hamas alive more than any other group or organization, they have leverage. The question is, will they exert that leverage to the fullest extent, and will that work with Hamas? But that, I am very hopeful, that would be a great outcome.
The US broker talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Do you think that these can still now happen? Do you think this has stalled progress on this? And was that perhaps Hamas's overall aim here? Our former Foreign Secretary to the UK, William Hague, has written today about how much of the Arab world has just given up on the two-state solution. They are now looking ahead. They're looking to the future. They're looking to economic partnerships with countries like Israel. They're fed up with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and they want to look away from it. Is Hamas here trying to drag these countries back to the table?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think that what's happening is that Saudi Arabia and the other Abraham Accords countries like United Arab Emirates and Bahrain represent Arab nations working alongside Israel and Jews to uplift the entire region. When you look at the other world, led by Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, the people that live there live in terrible poverty, under repression, dictatorship, corruption. They have a terrible, terrible life. So they don't want the comparison of basically what I'll say is the two groups in the Arab world. You have the group that's looking forward, that wants peace, Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations. And then you have, I'll call them the rejectionists, Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, they don't want that. They're afraid that their own people will rise up if they see that there's a better outcome for Arab people in that part of the world. So they want to destroy any notion of Israel and Saudi Arabia coming together and making peace. And insofar as amends for the Palestinian, the sad part is that the Saudi-Israeli talks was one of the last few opportunities to get some meaningful concessions for the Palestinians. They didn't even wait for the outcome to see what it looked like. So these are people who are like ISIS. Just make the comparison. This is exactly what ISIS did. And I think the real consequence is this. When you demonize a people, that's how you get a Holocaust. Germans were not bad people, but when you have this propaganda that makes Jews look so horrible, it makes it easier to kill them. So when the world calls Israel a racist nation, apartheid nation, which is not true, and blames Israel all the time, it lays the groundwork for delegitimization, which lays the groundwork for genocide. And that's the problem here.
Harley Lippman from the Middle East Partnership for Peace. Very good to talk to you today. Thank you for joining us on Sky.
Thank you.
Right, let's get a look at the weather for you.
Let's go to the next one.
Well, joining us live now from Gaza is Professor Hassan Abu Sitta. He's a plastic and reconstructive surgeon at Shifa Hospital. We spoke to you yesterday, Professor, Doctor. Very good to talk to you again. Thank you for joining us. The situation that you told us yesterday, the hospital was full, all your 650 beds were full, you were using generators for electricity. What have the last 24 hours been like?
The number of wounded has not stopped. As you probably heard in the background, the bombing is still going on around the area of the hospital. More and more children are being brought in. I've actually just been operating on children since I last spoke to you. Kids who have been taken out of the rubble of their own homes. This morning, a little girl with really severe facial injuries, whose mother is a doctor working at Shifa, was killed. The mother was killed. This little girl is going to need repeated reconstructive surgery for really until she reaches adult age. Last night, the last patient we finished in the early hours of the morning was an 11-year-old boy who was taken out from the rubble of his home. We didn't know who his family, where his family was. We didn't know his name. We gave him the tag name of unknown child number 6. And that's been the reality of this kind of continuous stream of patients and of the building shaking every few minutes as the area around it is being targeted.
You've worked there for a while. You're used to working under conflict situations, but how are you finding this? And the noise from the explosions is incredibly loud, and as you say, it makes the building shake.
The ferocity of this attack, you always have to keep reminding yourself it's only been 4 days, but the sheer number, 4,500 wounded, 900 killed, that's just the ferocity and the destruction, that kind of leveling of whole neighborhoods has just been horrendous. I've been here in the 2009, 2014 and 2021 wars, and there were nothing like this. Even the 2014 war was not as bad as this, and that was quite an intense war.
And in terms of the people that you're treating, you were talking about that first child, the child who's the child of one of your colleagues. How is that? How do you cope with dealing with the fact that you know your colleague is dead and you are now treating their child?
I think for all of the staff and the health workers in the operating room, when they had heard that this is the child of the doctor who had worked with them, there's a sense of foreboding that this could be them and their families any time. And it's always difficult when you're operating on a child. And even though I've been doing this kind of work, not just in Palestine, but in Syria and in Mosul and in Yemen, there are moments that kind of take your breath away. You kind of feel winded when you see a beautiful young girl, the braids, the elastic hairband, the pink elastic hairband, as you're trying to clean the face and in your mind, go through your mind, just what are the steps you're going to need to do to try to put this back together again. And then you see this and you're reminded that this was someone's baby child.
It's so difficult. It's unbearable to think about, isn't it? How long do you think you can stay there and continue the work? Do you fear that you're going to have to leave the hospital?
I think in terms of safety, I'm going to need to stay in the hospital. How long? I'm going to stay here and as long as it takes, until there's a ceasefire or until there's a humanitarian corridor. But once you're in, you're in. And the Israelis have just bombed Rafah crossing, so there's no way out. We're here for the duration. And we will do whatever it takes to try to provide whatever help people need.
The electricity, we are hearing different reports about the electricity supply in Gaza. I don't know if you're able to tell us whether you know whether or not it is now been switched off. Reuters were reporting an hour or so ago that it had been cut off. Are you aware of that?
Yes, the generators have been on all day, so we're now on to diesel supply, and we know that that's going to eventually run out because the Israelis announced total siege and no diesel is going to come in for the generators that keep the hospital. I think at any minute they're going to start rationing the electricity supply and just trying to save as much for the operating rooms and the intensive care areas. We're already beyond the capacity of the system to cope. Already I have 50 patients waiting to go to the operating room that I cannot get to the operating rooms because the priority is for more critically ill patients. And as these surgeries are delayed, these injuries run the risk of becoming infected, and these wounds become more difficult to reconstruct. And the disability that is left behind much worse.
What happens when the diesel runs out? How long do you think you can keep the hospital running for?
Once the diesel runs out, you can't run the anesthetic machines in the operating rooms, and you can't run the lights, and you just have to stop.
How long do you think you've got?
My feeling is that the Palestinian health system has the rest of the week before it collapses, not just because of the diesel. All supplies are running short. The number of wounded has completely used up what was already a denuded system and a crippled system as a result of 15 years of siege.
Well, Professor Hassan Abu-Sitta, it's really good to talk to you. We appreciate you joining us.
And that was, when was that? Wednesday. So they must have run out now. They haven't talked to him since that I've seen.
Sponsor?
I hope I'm not repeating these from last time.
There's retaliatory strikes by Israel have left more than 1,000 people dead. Fears are growing over how this war could evolve and escalate. Well, joining me now is journalist and author Rachel Shabi. Rachel, good to talk to you today. What do you fear the escalation of this conflict will be?
It's really hard to say because it looks like a situation that could very easily spiral out of all control. And that's because of the scale of the atrocities that we're seeing. We're seeing those reports coming out of Gaza. And we also just saw over the last few days what's been happening with the Hamas attack in Israel, which, as we know, it's 1,200 people killed, thousands injured, over 100 hostages taken, some very elderly, some very young, 2-year-old and 9-month-old reportedly. But it's not just that. It's not just the scale of the death, which is bad enough. It's the nature of it. It's the fact that it was such a slaughter, that the reports coming out of Kfar Aza and Kibbutz Be'eri are of bodies piled up in rooms where presumably people were rounded up and shot, of bodies being burned in the houses. And so that's what's making it so visceral and so traumatic, not just for Israelis, but also for Jewish people around the world. And then meanwhile, the retaliation in Gaza is utterly horrendous. I mean, people have been reporting from that region for some time. This is a strip that has been under siege for 16 years by Israel. There's 2.2 million people living there. It's already experienced 5 wars, and people who've reported on them will tell you that this is way worse. It is unimaginably worse. Entire areas are being flattened. Entire families are being wiped out. And of course, as you've been hearing, Palestinians in Gaza have got nowhere to go. The borders are sealed. They are trapped in an unfolding humanitarian catastrophe. And the worst of all is that the international community has given Israel a green light to do this.
I mean, some would argue, some commentators have said that it's Hamas who've given Israel the green light to do this. Hamas have provided on a plate an excuse for Israel to take the strongest possible response here. What would you say to that?
I would say that we all know that this didn't start on Saturday. And Saturday, what happened is appalling, is absolutely appalling. The Hamas attacks were an utter atrocity. We have been looking at decades of Israel in a brutal military occupation of Palestinians who have been suffering violence, death, misery, and humiliation every single day. We're looking at a system that's been described as an apartheid system of control by several human rights organizations. And you know, Jane, because you've heard this year in, year out, you've heard people say what we've been warning about for years, which is, how could this ever have been sustainable? Why on earth would the international community have ever allowed Israeli governments to believe that this was sustainable and not to end it, not only because it's an appalling lived experience for Palestinians who have to deal with this daily misery, but because it's not sustainable in terms of Israel and its own security. And I think that's the real tragedy, that Israeli leaders have been allowed to believe that this was ever possible. And we've seen that reality completely shattered over the last few days.
What impact do you think this is having on people that you know inside Israel? You know, there are lots of people living there who firmly believe in the two-state solution, believe, you know, that there could be coexistence. I would imagine that many people have had that belief shaken. Will existing divisions within Israeli society, do you think, now become more entrenched?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the reality is that for many years, it's not just the Israeli government that has shifted to a very far right position and is now an extreme right-wing government, which is partly the reason why the violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank has been so accelerated in the last few years. But it's also the population that has moved to the right. And that's the problem, that the population was also lulled into thinking that this status quo, where Palestinians experience misery on a daily basis in a way that's completely unsustainable, Israelis were also lulled into believing that that was sustainable. And it has to be said that, you know, when we look at what's happening in Gaza now and these kind of revenge, the need for revenge, sure, we can understand that. But what's the point? What's the outcome? What's the point of so many more Palestinians having to deal with this excruciating misery? What actually is the goal? Because again, we've been saying year in, year out that the only possible solution to this is a political one. The only solution is for the end of the occupation and for Palestinians to experience the same equalities and freedoms that all of us want and all of us long for.
Rachel, we're going to have to leave it there. Rachel Shabby, very interesting to talk to you. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Okay, next one. Where is it?
Saturday, they're going to have to go there.
Michael Clark there. Well, earlier I asked the Israeli economy minister about the action his military might take and whether a ground invasion could result in the deaths of more civilians, including those Israeli hostages being held captive in Gaza. This was his response.
We're going to take him out. We're going to take Hamas out, period.
Regardless of the safety of the hostages? Is that the hard fact?
We have to eliminate Hamas off the face of the earth. We will do that. We'll do whatever it takes to do that. Nothing will stop us.
Do you feel comfortable with this cutting off of fuel, of food, of electricity and of water? Do you feel comfortable about that, given what I was just saying, that, you know, 50% of the population are youngsters?
Do you remember what the U.S. did to Japan after Pearl Harbor? Do you remember what the Western world did to Germany, in Dresden, and other places? These are people that just killed innocent people in our country. Folks, think of what would happen. I remember what happened in Europe in the Second World War. Right. I know the history. And so they're killing 1,000 Israelis, wounding 2,500 people, taking over 100 hostages, and they think that we're going to help them? They have a serious problem thinking that we're going to help them in anything. They're in deep trouble. We're not going to help them in anything. Nothing until they surrender and we take them out.
Well, our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle is here, and well, Alistair, you only have to listen to the words of that minister in that interview to know that this is going to be a merciless operation.
Yeah, I think if I was a relative or family member of one of those who'd been taken hostage and being held in Gaza at the moment, the fact that he wasn't going to commit to their lives being spared at all costs would fill me with a lot of dread. I mean, I should say Nir Barkat, although a senior minister in the Israeli government at the moment, I don't believe is in the security cabinet, so he's probably not entirely read into what their military plans are going forward. But I think it's becoming pretty clear that a ground invasion is coming, and they have one objective, and that is to entirely eliminate Hamas, or at least to the best of their abilities. And of course, the hostages that are being held in Gaza will be important to them, and they will want to try and rescue them as best they can do. But at the same time, that military objective is clear, and I don't think they're going to let much get in their way. The one thing I would say, when we're looking at when this might happen, this ground invasion, we spoke...
It's interesting that he doesn't talk about civilians. They're just the hostages, and the Palestinian civilians didn't give it a look in there, or even international law, or the need to obey or to adhere to it. Next one, coming.
Now, the number of Israelis known to have died in the attacks by Hamas has continued to rise sharply, as has the number of Palestinians killed in strikes on Gaza. And there are now fears about how the cycle of violence could escalate. Well, joining me now from Tel Aviv is Alon Lee Green, the national coordinator of the Jewish Arab movement Standing Together. Very good to talk to you today, Alon. What went through your mind when you saw the situation on Saturday unfolding?
Honestly, I was shocked. It was beyond any ability to even understand or to grasp the gravity of things. So it was shocking, and it's continuing to be shocking. And every day, more and more news are coming, and the numbers that are still rising are starting to change into names and stories. And we all have people in our families that we know that died or been abducted. And I just feel that we are all in a collective feeling of trauma and shock.
Your organisation, Standing Together, works for peace, equality, and social justice. How damaged, how fragmented do all those things feel now?
It is scary. It is a very scary moment in the Israeli society. Wherever we turn and wherever we look and whatever channel we open in the news, we hear more and more calls for violence, for revenge, for blood and death. And we are feeling, the feelings of anger and revenge. And we understand how tortured our souls are, but we do understand that this is not the direction. This is not something that is going to bring back anyone to life, and it is not anything that is going to bring anyone back that is held right now in the Gaza Strip. There are 200 civilians, women, children that are held right now captured, and we are calling to our government to do everything they can to bring them back, to come to some kind of an agreement of returning them back home. And instead of hearing our government talking about the people that are still alive, we're just hearing those calls to flatten Gaza, to bring them back to the Stone Age. And it worries us very much. It's also worrying to just hear ministers in Israel saying that people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich saying that the Palestinians in Israel, the Arab citizens of Israel, are trying to be violent towards Jews, where the real reality is that they're as much in shock as we are, and they're like being in a complete solidarity with the Jewish people of Israel right now, and it's a very, very scary moment.
What impact is it having on your friends who are Israeli Arabs? Of course, they make up a fifth of the population inside Israel. I wonder how they are feeling at the moment.
I can feel the fear. I can feel the shock. I can see that a lot of them are, in one hand, opening their houses to host families that lost their houses. They're opening their wallets and they're donating and they're giving toys and books and they're trying to help as much as possible. But on the other hand, we can see the fear. We can see how it's scary now for an Arab citizen in Israel to answer the phone in Arabic in the street, because there are WhatsApp groups of people that are organizing with guns to find Arabs and to try and to pay revenge. This is not something that represents all of Israelis at all. Most of the Jewish Israelis, most of the and of the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel are in this together. We feel the same pain together. We feel the same fear together. We feel the same shock and trauma together. But there are people that are calling for more violence, and it's a moment where I think we will be measured by our humanity, humanity of how we respond, humanity of how we are dealing with this moment right now. And I am praying that we can survive this moment together and not apart, because the truth is, the honest truth about this moment and about this reality in Palestine and in Israel is that no one is going anywhere. Jews will remain here, Palestinians will remain here. There are millions in each side, and no one can go anywhere, because this is the home of all of us. And the ones that are saying that, the answer is more death or the answer is flattening Gaza are promising us nothing but more death and more insecurity.
Alon Lee Green, National Co-Director of Standing Together, a Jewish Arab movement for peace, equality and social justice in Israel. Thank you. Very interesting.
That's right, isn't it? Next, maybe one more.
has said that it's taken more than 130 hostages into Gaza. And many more people are missing. Their families posted their pictures, some of their pictures on social media in an effort to get some more information about where their loved ones are. Well, our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, has spoken to the granddaughter of Yafa Adda, an 85-year-old kidnapped by Hamas on Saturday.
An amazing woman, an amazing grandmother. She's a very positive, very funny woman. She likes to enjoy her life. She likes to help us enjoy our life, to cuddle us, to take care of us. And you know, in the video, you see her very strong.
That video of her in a golf cart went around the world. It was seen all over the world. It was shocking to those of us who don't know your grandmother, have never met your grandmother, to see an elderly lady in a golf cart. How did it make you feel?
I don't know if there's any word that can describe. We were shocked. It hurts in every inch of our bodies. We're very scared for her. She's ill, and of course she doesn't have her medicine with her, and we don't even know how long can she survive without her medicine. And what we do know is that without her medicine, she's in a lot of pain. So hopefully she's alive, but she's suffering every minute. And we're shocked. We're hurt. We're scared for her.
What would your message to Hamas be?
That's not human, whatever they've done. It's innocent people living their lives, and they need to come back home. You know, the situation might be hard, but there's no reason in the world that elderly and women and kids and babies get kidnapped. There's no reason, and bring them back home. Whatever you do, just bring them back home.
Suffering.
Us from Tel Aviv. Gideon, it's good to have you with us. I know it's a very difficult time right now. I've read your piece. The headline of it, Israel can't imprison 2 million Gazans without paying a cruel price. Was this attack on Saturday always inevitable?
It was inevitable. It was not inevitable in the way that if Israel would have looked for a real political solution and above all lifting the siege, I believe that the chances for such an operation would be smaller. But telling you that everything can be solved between us and Gaza, between us and the Palestinians within days or weeks, no, they can't. But the Israeli arrogance of believing that we can live only on our army, only on our swords, only on our technology, normalizing the siege on Gaza as if it's, something acceptable that 2 million people are living in a cage for 17 years now. This was unacceptable, and this is the source for everything. And again, by this, I don't mean that if Israel would have lifted the siege, all the problems would have been solved and Hamas would have vanished. No. But this should be the first step, and unfortunately, nobody even mentions it.
And Gideon, give us a sense of how much that kind of argument is, your argument, your position on this is reciprocated by ordinary Israelis. There's a lot of information, misinformation, in some parts on social media about the feelings within Israel. And of course, the country is reeling after coming under brutal attack. But that sense that something else could have happened, there could have been a different outcome to this, how much is that shared by ordinary Israelis?
None whatsoever, unfortunately. Israel, most of the Israelis, there are some individuals who might raise this kind of discourse, But most of the Israelis are now preoccupied, first of all, with mourning. Secondly, with looking for revenge. Anger is very strong. And looking for I'm afraid to say, looking for Palestinian bloodshed. And this is what is going to happen.
And it is as stark as that, isn't it? It is bloodshed. It is that brutal revenge for what happened on Saturday. And that's what awaits those 2.3 million people in Gaza.
Unfortunately, yes. And Israel this time declared already by its Minister of Defense, by the Prime Minister, by everyone, that there will be no restraints on us and we will go really brutally into Gaza without too many restraints. It frightens me a lot because I remember how it looked when Israel put on itself some restraints, how brutal it was, the attacks on Gaza. So thinking about a military operation in Gaza when the leaders are already saying that there will be no restraints, when you hear that the whole world is supporting now Israel and standing behind it, this might end with really a huge human tragedy.
And I'm glad you mentioned the whole world. The UK's Defence Secretary said this morning that he has very few concerns with what kind of retribution is meted out on Hamas by the IDF. And I suppose that's the difficulty, isn't it? Because, of course, going after Hamas is one thing and will be a response by the Israeli army. But when you go after Hamas in a place like the Gaza Strip, where there's 2.3 million people in a tiny slither of land, civilians are going to die.
I couldn't phrase it better than you. By the end of the day, you cannot make the separation, and Israel is not making the separation. Those bombarding from the air, I heard by now that already 250,000 people of Gaza lost their homes. You really believe that those 250,000 people deserve this terrible punishment? Remain homeless maybe forever? Because where will they go? We always forget what is Gaza. It's one of the most heavily populated areas in the world, with half of the population who are refugees and sons and grandsons of refugees who are living in refugee camps in inhuman conditions much before this operation. This operation will make their lives even worse. We are hearing now there is no electricity in Gaza, that the siege is now a total siege, as the Israeli politicians promised. What does it mean there is no electricity? For how long can you keep 2.3 million people without electricity? What would they eat? How would they be treated in hospitals? Who will get their medicines? I mean, all those questions are now putting aside only because the Hamas did one of the most barbaric operations ever. And I don't underestimate what they've done. But to punish everyone in Gaza is, first of all, immoral and criminal, and secondly, will not serve any of Israel's interests.
And that point of criminality may well come up later. There have been concerns about war crimes being committed by the coming retribution. Just finally then, Gideon, you mentioned the sort of the support from the international community for Israel's actions. Israel, when it takes these kind of steps, often does it unilaterally, regardless of sort of criticism coming from international partners. If there were criticism to come now, or if there was calls for response to be tempered, do you think this current government would listen?
Let's be frank. I mean, Israel learned how to live with condemnations. And if the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Minister of Defense of the UK or anyone else warns Israel, Israel knows that no actions will be followed. And that's the tragic of the impotence of the international community in the last decades, that it's only talking. When Russia is invading into Crimea, within weeks there are sanctions. But now it's not time to criticize the international community for this. Now Israel deserves support and help, no doubt about it. But even when I listened yesterday to the really wonderful speech taken by President Biden, which was really a historical speech, I don't underestimate it. But not to say one word about the Palestinian victims, not to say one word about the siege, totally ignore 2.3 million people, that most of them are innocent people and are going to pay now a hell of a price. This was rather disappointing.
Okay, Gideon Levy, writer and journalist, thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, that's all we've got time for, but I shall make another video soon with some more clips, and the clips that I mentioned previously that I've referred to that I haven't had time to get to. I don't know, it's just so sad, isn't it, when you hear all this. Human beings, when you take away the man-made concepts, the things that we've got used to, our tags and titles, and the power, possession and greed of the lands that we think are ours, and how we live, and when everything's been given to us freely, and we only have this one existence, and we're choosing it to live like this, to kill one another, whatever the reasons, whatever the justifications that people make for killing each other, to live like the lady talked about suffering for hostages being taken, the suffering she's feeling, the suffering that normal Palestinians feel, the suffering that all human beings feel when they're in these situations that are not just in Palestine, they're happening all over the world, where people are living in poverty because we live with a system of money, a man-made concept that doesn't need to exist. Everything that we have is here. We've been given a free life here. If we found ourselves on this place that has everything freely, and we've chosen to tag it and say you have to do this and this and this to be able to get it, just so it can control us like a herd of cattle. But we don't need to live like that, is it? Why should we live like that? It doesn't benefit humanity. We should be living knowing that, yes, look how lucky we are to be found ourselves like this, to have this existence, this beauty of life. We can share it and meet everyone else. We can live together harmoniously. We can make this place that we found ourselves the best it possibly can be for every single one, so that no one needs to suffer. Hospitals and technologies for everyone. Infrastructure for everyone. Because we have all the resources freely given to us, and we have the energy freely given to us in the form of life. But the problem is those in power do not want this. They're happy with us to be subjugated, to us to be shackled, to us to be slaves to this man-made concept of money and power and greed and possession, and us to fight each other, and us to hate each other, and us to form these groups and waste our energies, our own life, earning money so that we can just live, when everything has been given to us freely and it's been taken away from us all. Take care, take it easy. God bless and peace.